Hello, this is Kim.
This is Drea.
And this is Father Knows Death podcast. So what are we talking about today, Drea?
We're talking about the disappearance of Tara Calico.
Right, and this is Venus. Tara Calico went missing on September 20th, 1988. She was 19 years old, born February of 1969. Her parents at the time were Patty and John Dole. Her biological father and mother had divorced when she was really young. Her mother married John Dole, changed her last name. Patty's last name was changed to Dole. Tara's last name was still her father's name, Calico. But for all intents and purposes, from what I gather, John Dole was her father. He raised her from when she was very young. Tara and her mother were avid cyclists, and they'd gone out. They biked like 30-something miles a day. And her mother had stopped because she felt like they were being stalked by a car, and she was uncomfortable. But Tara went anyway that morning around 9:30, September 20th, 1988. Her mother said, "You should take Mace with you in case something happens." She thought that was a silly idea and left. She left, probably not even as a joke, just said, "Hey, if I'm not back by noon, come looking for me." She had a date with her boyfriend at noon to play tennis. And that's the last time her mother or anyone in her family saw her.
So Patty leaves the house. Her daughter says, "If I'm not home by noon, come looking for me." I just took that as a very practical, like she had a tight schedule. Mm-hmm. Her bike was actually out of commission that day, so she took her mom's bike.
Which was a noticeable, kind of a distinguishable, it was a pink Huffy with yellow piping on it. And I say that because it's a distinguishable looking. And I think Tara was dressed in such a way where she was wearing like white this and green socks and had a shirt on that said something, and she was wearing headphones with a Walkman listening to Boston. Not that that matters, but I say that because it was distinguishing. You weren't going to mistake someone wearing a white shirt with a bank's name on it on a pink Huffy and say, "I think that was somebody else." Tara looked fairly noticeable that day when she left.
So her mom goes out at 12:05 when her daughter's not back and drives the whole route, thinking probably that her bike could have given her trouble. That was before cell phones. It would have, she would have been walking the bike home at that point if she couldn't fix it, but didn't find anything. Started calling hospitals. She did have probably the best case scenario as far as a missing persons, in that she knew exactly down to the jewelry that she had on what her daughter looked like. Mm-hmm. That morning when she rode off. She knew exactly the route that she was traveling, and she knew an exact timeline of when she could have gone missing. So you can't get any better as far as really trying to get on this very quickly.
And the police did. From what I gather, the police were pretty quick into getting out and looking at this, which I think you said yesterday, because she was so adamant. She's like, "I know she was going to be back by noon." The police didn't say, "Well, she's an adult, give it time." The police were pretty quick acting in this.
I think her parents also were very adamant, especially her stepdad, John. He was, I don't think, going to take no. I'm sure she'll come back for an answer.
Yeah. So the police began searching down. It was Highway 47 or State Highway 47 that went outside of the town was Bellin, Belen, which is the Spanish form of Bethlehem, for what it's worth. So she left the city of Belen, which was about 5,000, 7,000 people, would bike out 15, 20 miles, turn around and come back. So I think that's the route the police started looking on. They talked to people who saw her, and again, people weren't saying, "Well, I think I saw somebody on a bike." It was a pink bicycle with a girl dressed like this. So the eyewitness accounts were pretty solid. The last one was at about 11:45. Someone saw her. A couple of the eyewitnesses, and eyewitnesses were by and large people that had driven up and down that road, said that it looked like she was being followed by a early to mid-50s white pickup truck, which 2 people saw it. It's not like it passed her, so apparently it was going really slow behind her.
And that she was wearing headphones. It didn't seem to notice that she was being followed.
Possibly,
is what a couple of people said. There was a circulated sketch of the driver. Looks like a pretty generic white guy.
Didn't they say something about there was wrinkles between his eyes and his temples? I don't know. I saw that twice, and it seemed that stood out. I don't know.
I looked at the sketch. Honestly,
it just looks
like a white dude.
Yeah. So the police began looking, and they found what looked like, on any other day probably wouldn't have been that big a deal, but it looked like tire tracks in and around, mingled with car tracks or automobile tire tracks. Kind of a muddy area, and they thought that might be something, and it looked like the tires from the bicycle weren't in a straight line necessarily like you would think if you're riding it, but they were like they'd been dragged. So they thought this could be something, and that's where they started looking at.
So they didn't find much that first day that she went missing.
Right. And
then it rained heavily overnight, which may have obscured some evidence. But that was the next day, right, that they found that. And the Walkman, which was found broken, that was found 19 miles east.
So, some of it was found near that area. And then they began looking. They found possible footprints and started going that way. And the tracks ended in an area known as JFK State Park, which is a remote, kind of a base camp if you're going to go up in the mountains, I presume, because it was right there in the foothills of those mountains. And then they found the rest of it there. So some people assume that she did that on purpose, that Tara was...
That's what Patty thought.
Yeah, that she may have been leaving little breadcrumbs. They also found in this area empty beer cans, which they assume by, I guess, lack of rust and whatever, that it looked like someone had been drinking beer in this park fairly recently, as even recently as the day before. So that's where they begin kind of broadening their search in this JFK State Park. But they found the rest of the Walkman. They found those beer cans. They found some of the tracks leading from there.
They found the cassette tape.
Yes, they found the
and actually Patty
Boston.
Found that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the south side of the highway, like she had turned around and was heading back home. So it wasn't in the same place as the Walkman. So they're not really sure why that. But they did find the Boston cassette tape that she had been listening to.
So for the most part, on October 25th, the lead investigator, who was also the sheriff for Valencia County, where Belen is located, a man named Lawrence Romero, announced that they believed they had 2 suspects, 2 white males, around 35 to 40 years old. They even had description of this truck, more so. It was a mid-50s Ford truck. The plate number, someone said it was WBY or WBZ, and it ended in 6. The letters that spelled out Ford on the front of it were cracked and or broken. So they had pretty good description of this vehicle that they thought had something to do with it. 2 white men in this vehicle. And I think, unless you found out anything, not much happened for a while. The case kind of went cold for a little bit.
Yeah, and the search for her, they were thorough. I will say that.
There were helicopters out.
Helicopters.
And people in the community came out.
Horseback, bloodhounds, heat-seeking detectors, psychics.
Yeah.
I even saw that they provided a water witch to divine whether her body was submerged in a ditch. So
really?
Authorities.
They went hardcore on this one, which all props to them, because you hear a lot of times where the cops will say, well, just wait 24 hours, or they think, well, she could have run away. And it seemed like, from what I gather, to your point, they went pretty hard on this.
They did. Now, Patty had some quibbles with the early investigation, including that, and this was an interview that she gave to the Albuquerque, I can't say that name, Tribune, that early on in the investigation, one of the sheriff's detectives on the case would call her nearly every day, but provide her with like new gruesome scenarios about what he thought had happened to Tara.
Oh, really? I didn't see this.
She said the most awful was that she was abducted by a satanic cult who cut off her hands and planted them in an autumnal equinox fertility ritual. Tara was then tied to a post for 3 days and burned at the stake. And then another day he said she probably just ran away.
Well, this was the 80s, and anybody that went missing in the 80s, Satanism was somewhere in the top 3.
Yes. Yeah. When the sheriff's department was asked about this fella, they said, this detective hasn't worked here for 5 years. That is not in accordance with our practices.
He was freelancing.
Disavowing him. Yes.
But I think you're always going to have something like that, and he didn't work there. But I think the police department or the sheriff's department were on top of this. They seem to be
making a large-scale effort.
But after Lawrence Romero, the sheriff, released that information of who we think did it, and here's a description of the truck, that was in October of 88. Not much happened. It seemed to go dead, and they looked and looked and looked and couldn't figure out much. The next break in the case is probably why we're talking about this, in my opinion. This is probably why Tara's case is, higher up on the list, because sadly a lot of people go missing. In June 15th in 1989, in Port St. Joe, Florida, a woman who I have always seen, unnamed woman. I don't know why she seems like she should be key in this, but nothing. Found a Polaroid picture. And if you know anything about true crime, if you've listened to anything, you've probably seen this picture. It's infamous in that circle. It's 2 people, and I'm going to describe ostensibly what it is, and we'll get into it later. It's 2 people tied up in the back of the van who are gagged, who look to be in distress. You can see the wall panel of the van behind them. You can see the door in front of them, so whoever took it was taking it from outside the van through the sliding door. The girl looks to be late teens, and the boy looks to be early teens, maybe 10 to 15, somewhere in there. Probably closer to 12, 13, looks to me. And they look to be kidnapped victims in distress, being held against their will in the back of a white van. That's what it looks like. Go ahead.
I submit to the court.
Yeah. We'll get into that, because the picture was shown, it was taken and somehow made its way to Inside Edition, I believe.
Yeah, Current Affairs.
A Current Affair. Yeah. And got put out. Someone in the Dole family or friends of them said, you should look at this picture, to Patty and John.
They said this picture, there's a picture of Tara on the news.
Yeah.
Is what they said.
That is a good point. So they looked at the picture. She actually flew out to Florida. Maybe both of them, but I know Patty flew out to Florida to see the picture firsthand, hold it in her hand, and said it was her daughter. She said, I believe that's Tara. Now, I've not seen the time frame, whether she picked it up and at first glance said, I know that's my daughter, or if she was equivocating. I don't know. It could be, and came to the conclusion that it was. That may not be material at all. But at some point, she said, I believe this is Tara in the picture. And when it connected, that picture, it was already kind of infamous, connected with a person they could put their finger on. That's when those two connections, that connection was made, it kind of exploded.
And then parents came forward and said that they thought they recognized the boy
right
in the photo. as their son Michael, who had vanished on a camping trip with his father in the Zuni Mountains.
Not too far from
Not
where
too
Tara
far
went
from
missing.
where Tara went missing.
Yeah.
And so they, again, seemed pretty sure that was Michael.
I've heard that the parents of Michael were a little bit more subdued than the parents of Tara. Tara's parents were more adamant that was their child than the Byers family was. But they said that could be. Especially if you say that is Tara, you say that's a girl that went missing a few months ago. 7 months ago? From New Mexico. Our son also went missing around that time from New Mexico. I think that may have been why the Henley family said what they said.
And a forensic artist compared pictures of Tara and Michael and said that he was 85% sure that they were the ones.
Each. 85% sure that's Tara and 85% sure it's Michael.
Exactly. There were other analysis done of the photo. Scotland Yard said that the woman was Tara. Los Alamos National Laboratory said it was not. The FBI analysis was inconclusive.
Mm-hmm.
There were other analysis done of the photo as well.
Yeah, but less reputable forensic
just of other
people.
Things besides the people.
Yeah.
So, like the film, they figured out wasn't available until May 1989.
And this was June, so this picture had to be taken within
It was very
a month.
recent.
Yeah.
Yes. And so they knew that this wasn't something that was taken years ago. So that kind of
right after Tara went missing.
Yeah.
This was recent, within a month. Yeah.
There was also a book sitting next to the girl in the photo, and there was a possible phone number scratched into the spine.
Yeah.
And the FBI, I mean, again, due diligence, tried to analyze the numbers that they could make out, came up with 300 possible phone numbers, of which 57 were valid numbers, and went through all 57 phone numbers and didn't come up with any leads based on that.
And that book was My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews. V.C. Andrews was a writer at the time of, I don't know if they would be called horror, but at least psychological thrillers. And that the protagonists in these were oftentimes teenage girls. And she kind of had this, I never read any of them, but it's always seemed to me her target audience were these teenage girls, late teens, early 20s women who would read these books by a female writer about female protagonists in a very horrific or psychological horror kind of atmosphere. The reason I say that is Tara's mom said that was Tara's favorite book and or writer. And that book was in the picture next to who she said was Tara. So these things are starting to line up that something may be going on here. There could be a connection.
And we'll say the other thing is this woman who found the photo, she was at a convenience store, and when she got out of her car, there was a white van in the next parking space. Mm-hmm. And when she came back, that van was gone and that picture was on the ground.
Right.
She notified police immediately, and they did a stop traffic.
Yeah,
and
they
were
set up
looking
roadblocks for that white van.
So they did take it very seriously. Immediately, they were circulating there in Florida a picture of that van, but nothing came of it.
And the picture again it very much looked like the people inside of it were in a white van. So that connection played out. And the man driving it was a white man in a mustache who we all know that's who commit crimes.
Exactly.
Right? Even in the 80s, if you were a white man in a mustache, you're just like...
driving a van.
Yeah. If he had those big round glasses, he's guilty of something. That's all you need. So again, this looked like a promisingly... And Tara's mother said one reason she knows it's Tara's because Tara had been in a car accident and had a scar on her leg, and that girl had the same scar on her leg. So this became... okay, Tara's still alive. Somehow she's 1,500 miles away in Florida. This guy has kidnapped her and kept her in some state of imprisonment against her will so it was September to June, so what is that? October, November, 9 months? Something like that? 9 months, I think. So this, I mean, is this a serial kidnapper? What's he been doing with her for this time? But then cracks began to appear, and I think the first one was with a young boy.
Yeah, so sadly, the remains of Michael Henley were found in 1990, like 7 miles from where he and his father were camping. And it was found that he died from prolonged exposure. So basically, he wandered off, he got lost, he died from exposure. So
yeah, he was never in the back of that
100%,
van in Florida.
Yeah, not.
They also, people looked at it and said, people don't look like this when they're in distress. One of the things I see is the girl, they had their hands behind their backs, which leads you to believe in that scenario they were bound. But her shoulders were in a position that you're not going to be in if you're bound. It's like her hands were just behind her back. Your shoulders are more drawn back when they have to tie your wrists together. You can do that, like put your hands behind your back and you'll feel one way. Now put them close enough to where they have to be bound and your shoulders will take a new position that's a little bit more uncomfortable. She wasn't like that. The duct tape on their mouth looked brand new. Not the tape itself, but that had been freshly applied, and there was no skin discoloration around the duct tape. So,
This is
V.C. Andrews was the favorite writer of a lot of young girls who were in their late teens, early 20s. So...
Yes. So when this photo was first described to me, it was there, two kids bound and gagged in the back of a van, obviously in distress. And I honestly was like, I don't even think I want to see that. Like, that sounds horrible. And then when I looked at the picture, I was like, I'm not sure we're looking at the same picture.
Yeah, you were pretty quick to, and to a further point, you're not. Your introduction into true crime came here a couple of months ago when you started helping me with this. That's not that you didn't like it, but you're not a true crime buff, so you hadn't seen this picture.
No.
You didn't know about it.
This may be famous in this circle, but this was news to me.
Yeah.
And seeing it with that, just with that brief context, no. They are not. Bound and gagged is prejudicial. Let me say that.
Yeah.
A piece of tape over your mouth is not a gag. A wad of fabric in your mouth and something going all the way around your head is a gag. A piece of tape is not a gag.
Yeah, they said that people gag people with duct tape in movies, not in real life. That's right. What I read somewhere.
And again, there's no evidence that they're bound. Their hands are behind their back. You can say that. You can't see what's happening. Both of the kids look healthy. Very tan. They don't look tired. They don't look dirty. They don't look like they've been crying. There are no signs of bruising or other injuries. Their clothes are very clean. The entire scene is disorganized, but not dirty. Mm-hmm. There is a plastic cup and a squirt gun. And that book, to me, that does not say kids being kidnapped.
Right.
I posit to you. These are two children on vacation in Florida in June with their dad, who thought it would be funny to stage a photo like this to show mom what a good time they all had when they get back home.
Mm-hmm. It possibly could be. The girl looks to me equal parts bored, frustrated, and scared. But I don't even know. That's so easy to read.
She looks like, oh my God,
right.
My family is the worst.
I had to put down this book to stage this picture for my stupid father. The boy does look a little bit more frightened to me.
He doesn't at all to me, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, I know it is. Because you look at it, people, obviously, we'll probably have it up on some of our social media, but if you Google Tara Calico Polaroid, probably even Tara Calico, it's going to be one of the first images you see. And
to me, it looks like, yeah, Dad, this is going to be so cool. I'm going to, come on, sis, let's look real scared.
Yeah, which your theory would be 100% believable if the people who'd taken that picture had come forward and said, whoa, this was a gag picture we took, guys. This is not Tara Calico. This is not anybody. Here's my daughter. Here's my son. I took the picture. Our bad. This has been 40 years and no one has come forth and said, this was a hoax, this was a gag picture, we didn't mean for this to get out.
And my explanation for that is twofold. One is that when this hits the news and suddenly people are saying this is their disappeared children, are you going to be the one that comes forth and is like, no, look, your kids are probably dead. These are
Well, that's
our
not
children.
what you would do. You would just come forth and say, whoa, no, that's our picture.
But that's,
and just nip it in the bud.
But the other thing is, yeah, I guarantee you, because I'm sorry, only a dad's going to take a picture of that. He shows that to mom, and then it ends up in the news, and she was like, I will murder you for reals if the police come and take our children, because you're like, hey, I duct tape my children for fun.
Yeah, I get that, but it still defies explanation to me. In 40 years, I mean, that kid is in his 50s, that little boy is 40, 50 years old now. He lived with that forever. He didn't, like, the dad dies. If you think this was a dad, passed away, or he's so old nobody's going to mess with him. One of the kids goes, look, it was dad, it's us. Don't associate it. Because by not saying something, you are giving hope to these people, and you're prolonging their misery. And it goes back to, which unbelievable thing do you think is real? And if gun to my head, I would fall on the side that it's not Tara. I'm pretty sure it's not Tara. It doesn't look like her. The scar that her mother saw, there's a scar there, but it's very, I mean, that doesn't play with me. You know what I mean? It didn't.
I couldn't see it.
Yeah, I saw it only when I watched the video and they circled it. I don't think it has anything to do with Tara's disappearance at all. But I think it may be a bit more nefarious than you think, because someone's hiding it. Someone's not coming forward and saying anything because they didn't commit a crime. They didn't do anything wrong.
Are you allowed to duct tape your children?
Sure. You know what I mean? If it's like, hey,
the 80s.
let's just be silly. Let's be silly and send this to your mom. And they were like, okay, yeah. And even if the girl's like, God, Dad, I mean, he didn't break any laws if your scenario happened.
Kidnapping children and giving them squirt guns and books.
I don't know. It's just a weird picture that defies explanation. There's not an explanation where you listen to it and go, yep, I believe that's probably what happened. Was it a family doing a silly thing? Easily could have been. In 40 years, someone would have come forward, because it wasn't just the three of them. It wasn't just whoever took the picture and the two people in there. People could look at that and go, oh, that's Larry and Sarah. You know what I mean? I know that family. People knew who that family
nobody's
was.
come up with missing children. No other family has come forward.
This picture is very weird.
These are my kids. But
One thing I did see is a police officer somewhere said someone called into him and said, she's the girl in that picture. And he took the information, and she was anonymous. She didn't want to get in trouble or whatever. And he took it and put it into his computer. And then when things, started happening, he went back. That computer had fried, and the hard drive had fried, and they couldn't get the information back. That's completely something you read on the internet. So someone did possibly come forward. But I think that picture is the key to it being what it is today. And however you explain it, it's a weird picture. So, as a side note, other pictures came in. They found other pictures but I think at this point it was Tara Calico equals Polaroid picture. And when they found a weird Polaroid picture, is this her too? There are two more that circulate out there that you may see. One is a close-up of a woman who does look to be more gagged, like there is something over her face that's not just a piece of duct tape. She does look more distressed. There's something in the background that looks like it could be the same fabric that was in the background of the first one. Who knows? It was found like in a mine in California. Has no connection, right? And then there's one of two people on an Amtrak train, and it looks, it's obviously staged. You can see the man's face as clear as day, and the woman is making almost a dramatic with her head thrown back, and there's a can of Sprite in front of them, and it's seats on a bus or a train. I think they've distinguished it as a train, but those seem weird. Much, much later, Port St. Joe Police Department got pictures from Albuquerque, New Mexico, of a boy with magic marker or Sharpie across the mouth in the form of a gag or duct tape, and another picture without that on it. And then the police department got that, and the local newspaper got the same picture, which kind of looked like this is the boy you're looking for from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The weird connection with that is it was sent to Port St. Joe from Albuquerque.
Yeah,
and those two...
Because the case had become... I mean, there was so much notoriety at that point.
I
think that's just somebody who thought that would be amusing in some way. It's not.
A totally different matter. Who thinks that shit's amusing when people are missing and dying and stuff like that? I think this would be funny.
Yeah, it's definitely not funny.
But the Polaroid, I would suggest everyone look at it, make your own decisions, because... If you look online...
We've already tried to bias you one way or the other.
it is... They range from, this is Tara, and she was kidnapped, and the kidnapper was this guy, and they have serial killers, and he had a white van, and this is 100% her, to... Well, that's obviously a fake. That's obvious. It's absolutely a fake. And they run the gamut, you know? I'm more inclined to believe that it's a fake. It's just hard for me to believe no one's come forward in all this time to say, that's us. That was a silly picture we made. Sorry. No one. So, but to move away from that.
Well, so that was in 1989. And then really nothing with the case for a while. In 1998, Tara Calico was officially declared dead. A judge ruled her death a homicide. I mean, they didn't have anything new to go on at that point. Patty and John continued to be very active. I mean, for years. I mean, up until their deaths, they remained very active. Patty died in 2006 and spent, I mean, the rest of her life after Tara's disappearance spent looking for her daughter.
And she died from a series of strokes, and she had strokes previous to that, and before she died she had entered into that fate. I don't know what to call it, but she couldn't talk, you know. I think for the last few months of her life she suffered from the effects of a stroke, and it was very sad. I've heard this a couple of places, that her and her husband would be out, and if she saw someone on a bicycle she would point to it, and her husband would say, no, that's not Tara. I mean, even in that state of her life, she was still, from 88 to 2006, 18 years she lived looking for her daughter. And that's always just horribly sad when that becomes your existence, you know. That's just very, very sad. But her daughter has since taken up, Tara's sister has since kind of taken up the lead now. So in 2008, the then sheriff of Valencia County, Rene Rivera, he announces he knows what happened. He knows who did it. He can't make the arrest because he doesn't have concrete evidence, but he knows what happened. And, I mean, the outcry to that was, how can you not arrest them? And Patty was dead at this point, but John, her father, was livid. How are you doing that? Why are you torturing me and the family, saying you know who did it, but you're not going to do anything about it?
And what he said happened was that two teenagers accidentally were driving behind her, hit her with their truck, panicked, and then killed her.
Right.
And that, he said that he knew the names of those involved, but without a body, he didn't have a case. And I agree, this seems like a really bizarre announcement to come out with, that you know who did it, but you can't say.
Yeah. I think... from what he said later, he was trying to draw them out. Basically, he was saying, I know who you are, and if you don't come forward and confess to this, we're going to arrest you, and it's going to be worse on you. That he was trying to draw the people out.
Yeah, is this a tactic?
Yeah, that's not, like somebody else said that's not how policing works. You don't let the people know that you know, and just like, we hope you turn yourself in, because that doesn't work. So, and in this case, it didn't work.
Again, outside of maybe TV shows where, they say that, and then the person is so overcome with guilt that they make a dramatic scene. And whatever
reason, right or wrong, it didn't work.
So that was 2008 that happened. And then, again, you know, John, her stepdad's like, is something going to happen here?
Mm-hmm. And the answer was no.
Happening.
Yeah.
So in 2010, New Mexico State Police got involved in the case and reviewed everything at the behest of a former classmate of Tara's named Melinda Escobar. And she said that she was herself investigating the case, and that her life had been threatened.
Right. Yeah, she had a hit put out on her, is what she told the cops.
And so the officer, he investigated. The information he got from Renee Rivera, was that they had identified 3 possible suspects, and one of the suspects was deceased. He looked over all the FBI files. He went to the district attorney, who basically said, look, without a confession or a body, this isn't going anywhere. And so he kind of felt like he was a little bit at an impasse.
Yeah.
And basically told that to Miss Escobar that, I don't know if there's much that I can do. The New Mexico State Police officer seemed, my reading of his notes, he sounded a little bit equivocal about her. He wasn't dismissive of this, what she said about having a hit put on her, but he was also like, she couldn't give me any names. She couldn't give me any evidence. Mm-hmm. She said that she had information and wanted excavation equipment in order to dig for Tara at certain locations, but she wouldn't give me specific names. It's all like, I heard from this person who heard from this person about something like this.
So the next thing that happened that I see is in 2013, there was a big task force that was assembled. It took Valencia County, it took Belen Police Department, State Police, the FBI, people from all these law enforcement agencies were gathered for this big task force to look into it, which feels there's a push, and then nothing.
Well,
at that point, we see there's nothing. As an aside too, back to that picture, I didn't mention it. I read a theory that Tara's mom said that was Tara and wanted it to be looked at because if it was Tara in New Mexico, now it's Tara being a crime still perpetrated in Florida. It's a crime that crossed state lines. And apparently the FBI wasn't part of the investigation, but that drew them in because of the state lines. And some say that she may not really have thought that was her daughter, but at that point the FBI became an active participant in the case. And if that's why she did it, then kudos to her for outwitting the FBI and say, I'll get you in somehow. I don't know. But now the FBI is definitely part of this case.
Yeah, and when that New Mexico police officer, the state police, had access to the FBI files from the case, there were 15 volumes of FBI files. So they have also due diligence on their part.
Which included a picture. They had a bunch of information about that picture in there. And then the latest I saw was just September of last year. The Valencia County Sheriff's Department said they have new leads they're investigating. But there was something that happened back in around 2013 that wasn't released till later that could be very, very much important.
So this is October 2013, and Richard Williamson sits down with a former sheriff's deputy named Frank Mathola. And this was Frank's recounting of a confession that was made to him back in, I've seen 2010. It doesn't actually give a date in the 2013 interview with Frank, and it's possible he didn't remember exactly when, but I've heard 2010 was the original date.
It wasn't a deathbed confession or something along those lines?
Yeah, well, I've heard deathbed confession. I've also heard just he was very sick, so I'm not sure if that, was he dying and so they're just using 2010 as well, he died then, so it must be then, or was it just he was terminally ill and had a year to live? I don't know. But Henry Brown made contact with Frank Mathola and said that he was dying. Mr. Brown did, and that he wanted to get something off of his chest. And the deputy used his tape recorder to tape record their interview at the time, as would be standard procedure, just like this interview in 2013 was being recorded. And Mr. Brown explained that at the time of Tara's disappearance, Lawrence Romero Jr., so this is the son of Lawrence Romero, the sheriff, who was Valencia County Sheriff when Tara went missing. This is his son, lived in a trailer home just down the street from Mr. Brown. And even though Mr. Brown was a lot older than Lawrence and his friends, he said he actually knew the boys because he had been like a custodian at their school, and that they would party there, they would smoke marijuana, and he would go down and party with Romero and his friends sometimes.
Did it say they were making margaritas and fajitas or something?
There was a very specific, drinking margaritas and making fajitas.
That's a party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a makeshift basement under the trailer, which is just like basically like a dug out basement that was under there. And that Mr. Brown said he was in the basement with them and he saw a small grave there.
What did you say? A grave wrapped in blue tarp? Which I don't understand that syntax of that sentence.
I don't either.
A grave wrapped in a blue tarp you don't wrap a grave in.
Right, exactly. So I don't know if this was I assume that means there was a blue tarp in what looked to be a shallow grave to him. And so Mr. Brown said that at that point, Lawrence Romero and his friends talked about how they had abducted Tara, raped her, and killed her.
Right. Apparently, Romero wanted to date her because she had just broken up with her boyfriend, Jeff Abeda, is what he said in the... This is multiple hand information at this point.
Yeah, so this is what
Romero
Frank
said it to Henry. Henry said it to Frank. Frank told the investigator, and now we're telling you, so this telephone is... But the official records, which we both have seen, say that Tara had recently broken up with her boyfriend, Jeff Abeda, and that he had tried to date her and she had rebuffed him. So they knew where she was going to be. They went out on the road. They hit her with the truck, put her in the back of the truck, and took her to a gravel pit where... Yeah.
So they said that they raped her and that afterwards she, quote, got ballsy.
Yeah.
And stood up and pulled her pants up and said she was going to make sure they were all going to jail. And at that point, Lawrence Romero went and got a knife and the other three boys held her down while he stabbed her.
Yeah. So if you look at some of the information that came out where Rene Rivera said, I know who did it, but I'm not going to say. One of the reasons he may not wanted to have said, because if you implicate a law enforcement relative, you really have to have some airtight information. And he may not have had that. So Rivera may have been hedging his bets, saying, look, I know who did it, but I can't tell you. And there's a reason I can't tell you, but he didn't say that. I also heard Rivera was the deputy sheriff during this time. Romero was the sheriff, and that Rivera was himself not on the up and up. I don't know if that's true. But it does lead back to some more information.
So the other information that Mr. Brown had was, so he said that the body at first they left it close to where they killed her, and then they got nervous when the large-scale search started, and that there's a couple of different things, because he's saying that she's buried in the basement, but then he's also saying they dumped her in a pond.
Right.
Owned by this redheaded guy who was one of the perpetrators.
Yeah.
And
I think there were 4 people, and he named 3 of them, and he said there was a redheaded kid there I didn't know, or something
Yes.
like that. Yeah.
Yes. And that they took her bike to the junkyard, is what they said. And he kept talking about how they were all involved in drugs, and again, that she had been dating Jeff Ebeta, who is one of the boys.
And the reason I brought that up is she was not dating Jeff Ebeta.
Yeah.
And Jeff Ebeta was, from what I gather, part of their scene, kind of a drug dealing, kind of low-life kind of guy. And Tara's friends are like, she wouldn't be dating that, because she was dating a guy named Jack
Cole,
that she was going to play tennis with that afternoon.
Yeah, a very above board,
right.
Like her, athletic, smart, not from this crowd.
So the story has 2 or 3 weird, was it, because he says, I saw the body in the grave, but he also says they had dumped the body. By that point, they had dumped the body in a pond, which it can't be both. He didn't see the body in a grave that they had dumped in a pond at a later date. The name of the boyfriend was wrong. So people are like, how true is this? What other details of this are not real?
Right. So it's very possible there's some truth here, but again, the game of telephone, where this went through so many different players. Now, there's a couple reasons why we can't get back to the original source, or closer to the original source.
Yeah.
So it starts with Lawrence Romero Jr.
Right. He committed suicide, or was playing a game of Russian roulette. He died to a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head.
And this was in 91.
Right.
So this was
only
just
3 years. Now, this is one of those things. I think this is my part in the podcast to give these weird things, and it's yours to reel us back into reality. The theory is he did commit suicide. His father tried to cover it up by saying it was Russian roulette because his father didn't want the stigma of suicide on his son.
His father said it was a homicide.
Well, at first, because, there was changes, like, you can look at the crime scene. I haven't seen it. This is not stuff that's been released, but it's obvious that he'd been moved, but someone at the scene said, I came in and looked at him and was trying to help him and move the body. But his father definitely didn't want suicide being tagged onto his son. Russian roulette was never brought up by anybody else. It was just something his father said. There's a theory that's what I read. But regardless of the circumstances, the theory is he did commit suicide. He left a note confessing what he had done. And that Rene Rivera was the officer that responded to this, who was the deputy sheriff at the time, found that note and destroyed it because it would implicate this boy, and he knew that his boss, the sheriff, wouldn't want this to happen. He probably talked with Romero, and they got rid of this evidence that implicated their son to do this, because Rivera was on the take. He would do what Romero wanted him to do. No idea if that's true. I've not read anything else about Rivera being that type of person. I've not read anything about Romero being, or Rivera being anything, good or bad. So, but he died of a gunshot wound to the head, whether it be homicide, suicide, or
and he
whatever.
Clearly, he was at the very least a habitual drug user. Lawrence Romero Jr.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely had friends that were, not above board kind of people. When he died, there was a friend of his in the house at the time, and he heard the gunshot in the other room. And they did question him, but didn't think that he was responsible for Romero's death. Now, he was
charged with...
Oh, yeah. So this is Lawrence Chavez, his friend. He did have some warrants out for his arrest at the time that Romero died for, among other things, assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, negligent use of a deadly weapon, eluding a police officer, and failure to appear.
Yeah.
Which just goes to, I think that, again, Romero and his friends are the kind of people that possibly could do something like what they're accused of. There was also kind of an interesting sideline to come out of his death, in that a woman claimed that when she saw Lawrence Romero Jr.'s picture in the paper, in his obituary picture, that she recognized him as the man who was driving the truck back when Tara disappeared, that she was one of the people who came forward and gave that initial description, and that when she saw this photo 3 years later, she was like, that's the guy that I saw.
Who knows? But to the point, this is one of the sticky points with this, because it feels like it's wrapped up. Like, you have a confession of somebody who said, even though there's discrepancies in this, that feels like that's probably something that happened. Where is this truck? How did the truck tie into it? It would have been easy to say, oh yeah, Lawrence owned a 1955 Ford white pickup truck with a camper shell in the back of it. From what I gather, they can show no connection to this mysterious truck to any of these boys, men that are implicated. And that, to me, is like, that's your linchpin. As soon as you find that one of them's connected to this truck, this thing becomes almost solved. But there's not. And they had the license plate, or a partial license plate. They had a description down to some of the letters on the word Ford were broken. They had a very good description of this truck. I guess unless some of that was a lie made up by the police department to separate their sons. I don't know, but there's nothing that ties these suspects to the truck that multiple people saw around her.
So we can't get any information from Lawrence Romero Jr. at this point. So the next step in the chain is this original interview with Henry Brown, because again, that happened in 2010-ish, and it's 3 years later that Frank's trying to recall what happened. Well, let's see, what did Henry Brown actually say in that taped confession in 2010? Maybe that's more reliable, except apparently it doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Mathola said that he gave the tapes to Sheriff Rivera of this confession from Henry Brown. And it says in this 2013 interview that Mathola was contacted by Melinda Escobar. And he said, hey, I made a tape of that confession, if you want to listen to it. And she said there's no report of any tapes being entered into evidence. And after this interview, I didn't find anything where that tape has ever surfaced. So I'm guessing that 2010 interview is, by whatever means, not available.
And as we alluded to, Henry himself has passed away.
Yes. Now, a little side note on Frank Mathola is that it is possible that he might have cause to not be happy with Sheriff Rivera. What came first? Is it that at this point he thinks he already thought Rivera was dirty and this just made it worse? Or is he kind of implicating Rivera in a cover-up because of this other incident that happened?
Okay.
So Mathola said that he got in a disagreement with the sheriff when he arrested a Mexican national and was told that the guy worked for Rene Rivera. And Rivera called him and said, you need to release him. He works for me. And Mathola said, I turned him over to ICE. You can do what you want, but I'm out of it. And Mathola said after that, he was removed from all special teams and assignments, and that basically Rivera just made his life a living hell until he resigned from the department.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, but I think you're going to find in a lot of cases just those kind of interpersonal things and weird things. But it just seems to be in this case with the Polaroid, with the Rivera coming forward and saying, I know who did it, but I can't say anything. A deathbed confession that names the sheriff's and lead investigator's son, who are all dead. Because I think the only person that Henry named in that's still alive is the unnamed redheaded person. I guess they don't even know if he's still alive because they don't know who it was, but the other three people he named have all since died somehow. So there's no I think there was a prosecutor for Valencia County who made the statement, like, unless you come forward with a confession or a body, there's nothing we can do. We're done with this. We've reached our ends. So, and I think that's where we're at now, is trying to find... And I think a confession is almost, unless this mysterious redheaded person is still alive and comes forward. And even if a 60-year-old man comes forward and say a 70-year-old man, I guess, would come forward who says, I had red hair. Can you believe him? You know what I mean? I think the confession side is out.
Well, because we have another one.
What?
Another confession.
Okay.
In 2013, Donald Dutcher's interview.
Oh, right.
With the task force. And so he said that he was friends with a drug user who confessed to him right before he overdosed. He said, Tara Calico talks to me at night. She asked why we did it, why we buried her out there, and gave a description of Green Lagoons by the rock quarry as where she was buried. And Donald Dutcher said that this guy, Charles Houghton, was involved, and Lawrence Romero Jr. was involved, and there were two other gentlemen, but he didn't know their names. The police did go, they asked him about a lot of people. You can tell they have a lot of names and trying to sort through who said what. So they asked him about a lot of people, and did he know them? Did he think that, were they possibly involved? It was a pretty lengthy interview with him. They were also trying to figure out kind of how reliable his information was, clearly. So you can tell they're a little bit skeptical about the story.
Yeah.
He didn't seem to have anything super concrete.
Yeah.
He didn't have any actual evidence. The other thing was that, they had talked about lots of people just on the periphery of this case they had asked Dutcher about. And shortly after the interview, they got a kind of frantic call from somebody. Apparently, Donald Dutcher, after this interview was concluded, went to somebody and said, hey, this task force pulled me in on the Tara Calico investigation, and your name came up as a person of interest. This person freaked out and called and was like, am I under investigation? They were like, you absolutely are not. Nope. And so they made this little comment, addendum at the end of Donald Dutcher's interview. The task force is now concerned that Donald Dutcher, who came in as a cooperative subject, is now calling the people we discussed to tell them they are targets in our investigation.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's all, gun to my head at the end of it, I believe the scenario with the boys that were following her, hit her, took her somewhere, and wound up murdering her and burying her somewhere. It seems likely because that's what happens. It's rarely serial killers, and it's rarely some guy kidnapped her and kept her in the back of a van for months with another person. It's rarely things like that. Honestly,
I just hope that it was that they hit her with the truck and that she died instantly and nothing else happened to her. That's, I think, the best case scenario for Tara.
Yeah. But, if you hit somebody accidentally, I guess looking at this from a normal person, if I hit somebody accidentally, even if I hurt them, at best I'm calling the cops and staying there and waiting, even if I know I may get in trouble. But at worst, I'm just leaving. You know what I mean? I'm just pulling away and getting out of there. Picking her up and taking all of her stuff further implicates them. So I feel like it was more, what's the word I'm looking for? They predetermined. Not predetermined. What is it? Premeditated. They were after her, which, if you remember at the very beginning of this, her mother didn't go because she felt like they were being stalked. So I just think they were waiting for the right moment. So.
Now, this case is fairly cold, and yet, as soon as last year, September 2021, they the Valencia County Sheriff's Office and the New Mexico State Police announced that they had a lead and had a warrant for a private residence and were searching it. We don't know that anything came out of it, but it's possible.
Something could have been found, and now they're just getting their ducks in a row.
Yeah.
So, for a year, but still. Yeah, I think those boys probably had something to do with it. I don't know what happened to the truck. I don't know how they can't bring that mysterious truck into it. It's not like it didn't exist. Multiple people saw it. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the boys, again, exactly who it was and what happened, I don't think we'll ever know. Again, my hope is that it sounds like at least several of the boys that may have been involved died in fairly horrible ways. So if there's any justice in this world, there is such a thing as ghosts, and Tara did come back and haunt them.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's all we've got. Do you have anything else to add?
No.
Okay. So I appreciate you listening. Hit up all of our social media. If you have anything that you want us to talk about, we're always looking for stuff, and we have a list of things we may be doing, but I would really like someone to come in and say, have you heard of this? And be interesting. So if anybody has anything they'd like to talk about, like us to talk about, let us know. Give us some likes on the Spotify or whatever you use. And, well, I guess we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Good night.